Working with Solaris and Seneferu. As usual, the first thing you should do when you are working with Seneferu is that you will log in to your Seneferu Production Manager. I will log in with an artist A, just testing artist. I will focus more in this session on the lighting, so I will ignore this task for now. I will start by working on this task. This task, as you can see, the task name is Scene 3 Lighting Template for the Scene. The SCN is a prefix, means that this task is related to the scene level itself. So this is actually going to be a lighting template that will be inherited for all the lighting tasks for the shots later. So we want to build a template for the whole sequence of shots belonging to scene 3. So let's get started. The first thing you have to do also is to set the application that you are going to use, where in this case we want to set it to Solaris. If you are going to make the template in Katana, I will set it to Katana. So now I will set it to Solaris. Then I will click on this button. This will open for you a terminal that is configured for this project. It's loading, it's going to load the proper or the right versions for the application and the plugins that are going to be loaded from this terminal. So now I will open Houdini. Okay, now when we open Houdini, we are going to set the task to current by clicking on this button. Set your task to in progress. Now when you set the task to current, you will see that you have all the dependencies needed for this task will be inspected and listed here. As you can see, you will have, because this is a scene level task, so all the assets that is members of the shots belonging to this scene are going to be listed in the dependencies according to the configured pipeline. And if you have created a task or a job for a lighting template for the whole project, then this template will be available in the dependencies of every scene level lighting template. If there is no scene lighting template, then the project lighting template will be available for each shot lighting task. So that's the concept of how it works. Usually we use the project-based lighting template to configure things like the render resolution and any things that we know that it's global to the whole project. That will be inherited inside any downstream process like the lighting template of the scene or the lighting in the shot itself, if there is no lighting template for the scene. However, in this case, I don't have such task created for the project. I will just explain on how we will work on the lighting template on the scene, and it's actually the same thing. There is no difference. So now you will see that there is camera animation for each shot, there is character animation for each shot, there is the scene level effects, there is the hair simulation for this character, for this shot, and for all the other shots, the animation of the other character for all the other shots, and so on. So everything that was ever a member of a shot and is needed for the lighting template, it will be listed here in the dependencies, including the shader library, of course, and so on. So now what we are going to do is we will blindly click on load dependencies. Don't worry that Seneferu will not load these multiple instances several times. What will happen is that Seneferu will load only one instance of each asset. In other words, it's going to load the things based on shot 1, but anything that is expected to be seen in the whole sequence of shots will be loaded in the scene. But what you are going to see is only what is related to the first shot of the sequence, where in this case it is scene 3 shot 1, which shot 1 is the first shot in this sequence. Now when you move through the timeline, you will see that you are viewing now your setup from the camera of shot 1. And if you look at what happened here, you will notice that Seneferu has built everything for you like this. This is the camera and these are the assets. In the scene level, you will find that this is the fluid effects, which is loaded here. You can query the version of it by clicking on this button. It's effects version 2, and if you see the list how it was built, and notice that Seneferu is building this recipe for you, and it orders everything in the proper order that avoids any name clashes or anything like that, because all the assets are coming from Seneferu. So you don't need to worry about your hierarchy or the naming or where the assets are loaded. All this will be managed automatically. And here is the shot related caches or assets. Here we will find a transform node for each character, where it has the animation cache and the close simulation cache. And if there is hair published for this character, you will see it here as well, and all organized under the shot context. Now you can just switch between the different shots, and this will switch all the recipe to the different shot that you are working on. So now you will see that you can go here and watch the scene from shot 2. You can, and so on. You can switch between the different shots and build up your scene, do the shader assignments, load the shader library, build the shader assignment, configure your render layers, do whatever you want. And if one of the assets doesn't exist on one of the shots, like in case of shot 6, so you don't worry about that. The assets that are not members of these shots will disappear from the scene silently, so you don't need to worry about this. But you need to configure anything related to them by switching between the different shots until you make sure that you have all your assets configured as expected before you publish this lighting recipe. So let's assume that we are going to create like a distant light here. Let's say that we also want the doom light. And let's say that we have render layer or render pass. Let's say that we have multiple layers. Let's say that you want only these two assets to be member of another render layer, and we will call this for example, BG, and this is as how it is. All you need to do in Seneferu in this case is to configure whatever path.exr footage $f for exr. All you need to do is to set the sequence name and extension. Don't worry about anything else because Seneferu will take care of that. So you can paste this here as well. And don't worry about where the files are going to be rendered and how exactly they will be named. Seneferu will take care of this when you publish your recipe later. So let's assume that this is what you did. What is going to happen now that every time you want to work on a shot, this exact recipe will be loaded as dependency for the shot lighting, in addition to any assets related to the shot that were not loaded here. Because when you build this template, maybe not all the shot's assets are published. So like in this case, there is no hair, but later when you load the shot, you will see the hair if the hair is published for the character, the hair simulation, I mean. So let's assume that this is what we want to do. We created the light, we made the texture assignments, and we finished all that, this kind of setup for the whole shots, and we switch it between the different shots to make sure that everything is working as expected. And we finished setting up all the render layers and AOVs and whatever. Then now we are ready to go by clicking on publish. Let's view it from any better angle, and notice that also when you set the task to current, Seneferu will set the frame range for the project, but because this is the frame range according to the shots, in case if this task is a shot related task that requires the frame range, but because this is a scene based task, so this is the frame range is on the default range. You can extend it manually if you want, but because this is a scene based, so the frame range doesn't do anything here except for your viewing purposes inside the working session. And now you are ready to publish by clicking on the publish button. It will ask you for any files to save, just it's opening on the other window. I will click on cancel. I don't want to append any additional files. If you actually look at what's happening in the background, you will notice that it's writing some logs here. You can watch them. And this is when it's finishing, it's popping up this. It's asking you to say anything about this version that you are publishing. Let's say that initial lighting template publish. Seneferu will also suggest to set the task to review or art review. It depends on what Seneferu sees about the history of the task. If the task has been previously art approved, it will go to review, or if it's a technical task, like in this case, it will go to Seneferu will propose that setting it to review. If it's something that requires art revision or needs to go to art department, then it will be set to art review, and so on. Don't worry about this. Seneferu will take care of, about the right status and will propose it to you. If you are sure that you want to set it to something else, you can say no. Otherwise, just keep it as it is and say yes. Now, this version is published. if you browse the tasks on this version, you will find that there is the Houdini file and the dependencies of this recipe. Then, if we go now to the supervisor desk, you will find now that this task came to me here for reviewing. So I can review the task and double check it, make sure that everything is as expected, and if I'm fine with it, then I will approve it. When I approve the task, notice what happened now. When the task is approved, anything that affects me will be updated here, and Seneferu will pop up a message that telling me, for example, that the lighting of shot 2 and shot 3, where both of them are assigned to me, Seneferu is telling me that these are ready to start. Now let's start working on our first lighting task here. I will set the task to current, set it to in progress, and as you notice, it's connected here. You will see the task brief, any notes that come on your task. Notice that this task is an old task actually that was done before in different applications, so there are a lot of notes here. Most of them are automated notes that are coming from Seneferu, and here is the task brief and so on. So now you can see that the lighting template that we made for the parent scene of this shot is now available in the dependencies, in addition to all the assets and caches related to this shot. Now, when I click on load dependencies, what's going to happen that Seneferu will load this lighting template that you made before, in addition to any additional asset that was published after this scene was created will also be merged to the scene. If anything that is already there, it will be just ignored. If you look at the log here, you will notice that when we were loading the dependencies, all these assets are ignored because it was already there in the scene. It was coming from this template. So how do we know that these are the proper versions? The thing is that we know that because what is loaded here is actually the current floor version of each asset, which is the approved version of each asset. When a new version is approved, then your recipe is updated automatically with the new one. All what you have to do now, because you already configured your scene, is that you will be able to just publish this or tweak the light on per shot basis. Just do the minor change that you may need to do for the lighting on this shot. Also, notice that when we loaded this asset here, which is these flames, this was a scene level simulation. So it's not simulated on per shot basis, but it's a big sequence that was simulated for on the scene level itself, that you can reuse it again and again in the shots instead of doing caches on per shot basis. So maybe you need to play with the offset of these flames before you start using them in the shot, especially when you are working on the next shots or something. In this case, with the flame, it doesn't matter, but in some other effects or some other simulations, this is something that you may need to consider. Also notice that actually Seneferu is giving you such thing or such offset that automatically overrides the file path. This is happening automatically. You don't need to do anything. This is just what Seneferu did when he loaded a scene level asset. So this is this. Now you are ready to go. by publishing this asset. And of course, there are some features here in Seneferu you may be aware of, that you can select any asset like this character clause simulation. You can query the version of this simulation. You can set it to previous version. You can use the latest approved version, and you can query the base version, which will tell you the version of this asset when the main recipe was created, in case if this is something that you have checked out from the system. You can select any node. For example, if I selected this clause simulation again, and I click on show dependencies, this will tell you or will give you a report about everything that you need or everything that this asset requires. For example, it's telling you here that this clause simulation for this character is version 2, and the current floor version is version 2 as well. The latest version is actually the same as current. Local version is 2. And it's telling you that this simulation for this shot requires the clause setup version 2 that made in Maya, and requires the animation FG of the character, and requires the garment version 2, and so on. So these are the things that was used to build or to simulate this cloth cache, just in case if you are troubleshooting an issue or something. And of course, as we mentioned before, you can now start doing some minor tweaks to your lights over the ones that you have from the scene template, or you can switch between the different shots and see how these tweaks are affecting or how these tweaks are going to look like in relation to the neighboring shots. And when everything is fine, you can just click on publish, and don't worry about the path of the render camera and the path of everything else, because Seneferu, as we said, Seneferu will configure all these things for you based on the shot caches, so you don't need to worry about anything, and this including the location of the render. But if you are not going to render the full shot range, then you have to configure that by setting the frame range yourself, by overriding the range that you want to do. Let's say it's this. And notice, of course, that now when we are working on the shot lighting task, now the frame range of the shot is properly or exactly as how it should be. If you look at the log here, you will notice that Seneferu is telling you that it gets the frame range from the database, since this shot was not found in any edits. What Seneferu is usually do is that it's by default will look for the frame range in the edit. Seneferu doesn't rely on human inputs to give such information, to avoid human mistakes, or to avoid when the editor is doing some different edits and cuts in the same shot. So Seneferu always tries to get the best frame range according to how this shot was used in the editing timeline. However, if you want to disable this feature, you can disable it, and then Seneferu will only rely on the database, as it happened this time when Seneferu didn't find this shot in any edit. So the system used the database frame range that was given in the web-based project page. So now we are ready to go. We can just click on publish. what the publish will do is now, because this is a task is supported on the farm, Seneferu is suggesting that you can submit preview render, which will render on the farm or will submit a job in tractor to render frame the first and mid and last frames, or you can submit it to render for final render. This will generate the task. I will not submit render for now. I will just say just publish, because actually I didn't resolve any shaders. I didn't make a proper setup for the lighting. And I will say cancel. I don't have any additional files to share. Then this should publish in the background, if you can see the logs, and when it's finishing it will pop up this message that tells you to set the task to art review this time, because now this needs to go to the art supervisor to review the outputs that you generated before this task gets approved. I will type whatever, initial lighting, and I will say okay. Now the task went to art review. Then your supervisors now will see that they have a new task to review. Notice that when you publish, Seneferu will automatically reset the scene graph variables to the current task that you are working on. So you don't need to worry about this. If you have changed these to different shots, Seneferu will make sure that the correct one is going to be published. So it will reset the scene graph state variables based on the current task that you are publishing. Now, do you remember when we mentioned that we have two render passes here? What happens is that when this lighting recipe goes to render, Seneferu checks which one of them is enabled and which one of them is disabled, and it's going to render any enabled render pass. What is going to happen that enabled render pass will have a new version, and it will be rendered and published in the database in this version. So maybe later you need to only re-render just one of them. Then all what you are going to do, let's say that this is a new recipe. If you are working in this task and you want to, you got a note on it, then you can check it out. When you check it out, it will come to you. You will modify whatever you need for this render pass, and let's say that this was fine, then you will just disable it. Now, when you publish a new version of this lighting recipe, what will happen is that this was rendered to version 1 and this was rendered in version 1. When you publish the new lighting recipe, which is lighting version 2, it will only render this BG to render version 2. Accordingly, when the comp artist later load the dependencies, the render of version 1 will come from here, and the render of version 2 will come from this task. So the comp artist will get the right render layers automatically without having to do anything and without you to have to do anything. This will all happen automatically according to the task notes and what the supervisors and you are approving of these renders. One more thing that I didn't mention here, in addition to that you can switch between the different shots, is that you can also query the variance of an asset. So let's say, let's go to this shot for example, and you can click on this character. You can select it from here, this character, and you can get variance. What get variance is doing is that it will load any available asset or look variance available for this character. So maybe in this shot you need this character to have a different look. The difference between the asset variance and the look variance, that the asset variant is a variant in the topology or the primitive or the assemblies of the models or primitives of this asset. And the look variant could be the same asset with the same transformation and assemblies, but with a different shaders and texture assignments. So if you apply a different look, you can select this and click on set look. This will set the current look to the one that you selected here, or if you want, you can select a different asset. As an example of asset variance, let's see something like this bus model. I will just reference this in the scene. If you have this and such asset in the scene, and when you click on get variance, this asset has some asset variance here. Like for example, we can set damage A or set damage B. This are setting the asset variance. And also each one of these variants have a different look variant regarding the shading and textures that would be assigned in render time. So this is the difference between the asset variant and the look variant. So if you want to set it back, you can do this. The look variants, however, are just tags or object properties that will be written. So to be applied in render time, the method that you are using to resolve the shaders in render time must be considering this. You may refer to how we build the shading networks in Katana and in Maya, the way that it treats the text dir and the material tag to decide which shader will be assigned to the object and which texture will be assigned on each shading component in the shader according to the object of that asset. So which means that your shader library should follow the names of the shader library of Seneferu, and your or if you added anything, any additional shaders, you can add it to Seneferu as well. And in the meanwhile, you shouldn't do direct texture assignment on the shaders. Instead, you should reference them with an expression path that refers to the text dir user properties on the objects. For more details about this, you may refer to building shaders in Katana and building shaders in Maya, which is covering this in more details. And by the way, these asset variants is another alternative for the USD variants, except that the variants in Seneferu are actually managed in the database itself. So when you are clicking on get variants, you are actually querying the database to know what are the available variants, and then when you apply a variant, you can handle, or you can decide which version of the variant are you going to use. So each variant has its own versions, and at the end all these variants can be already loaded or referenced in USD. So it's still using the USD memory management and payloads and things like that. But in the meanwhile, all your variants are managed in the database. In addition to that, the variants in Seneferu, of course, as I just explained, you can apply look variants in addition to the normal primitive variants.